My name is Elijah Vance. I am 75 years old. For my daughter and her husband, I was a ghost at the table, an open wallet, and finally a piece of luggage they could afford to lose. They left me stranded in a foreign country with nothing but the clothes on my back. They thought they were leaving an old man to fend for himself. But they were wrong. They were leaving a builder. And I flew home to dismantle the life they took for granted brick by brick. What they found when they returned was not the home they left, but the consequences they had built for themselves. Before I tell you how I did it, I would love to know where you are watching from. Let me know in the comments. And please like this video and subscribe to the channel if you believe that respect is something you earn, not something you inherit. The air in Rome was thick with heat and history, and the exhaust from 1,000 tiny cars. We were standing in the shadow of the Colosseum, a place built on spectacle and survival, and I was struggling to breathe. The stones beneath my feet were uneven, and the sun beat down on my head without mercy. I stopped, leaning on a low wall to catch my breath. "Maya," I said, my voice a little thin. "Can we just sit for a minute?" Chad, my son-in-law, shot a look at my daughter Maya, a look that was all sharp edges and impatience. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Seriously, Eli, we just got here." Maya wouldn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed on a souvenir stand selling miniature gladiator helmets. My daughter, the woman I taught to ride a bike and bait a fishing hook, couldn't even meet my gaze. Chad pulled her aside just a few feet away. He lowered his voice to a harsh whisper, but in the small space between the roar of traffic and the murmur of the crowd, his words found me as clear as a bell. "Look, are you sure you want to drag him everywhere? That old man is only bothering us. We have 1 week here, Maya. 1 week." The words hit me harder than the Roman sun. Bothering them. I was a bother. I watched my daughter's shoulders slump. She offered a weak protest, a sound so faint it was swallowed by the city. But then she nodded. "Okay," she said, her voice betraying me. Maybe Dad is tired. We can come back for him later." They walked back over to me, their faces arranged in masks of false concern. "Dad, we are just going to grab some water from that cart over there," Chad said, pointing vaguely. "You just wait here. We will be right back." I watched them go. I saw Chad put his arm around Maya's shoulder, pulling her close as they disappeared into the river of tourists. And I waited. I watched the sun crawl across the sky, turning the ancient stones from gold to orange. 10 minutes passed, then 30, then an hour. Tour groups came and went. The shadows grew long, turning the arches of the Colosseum into dark, empty eyes. And I knew with a cold certainty that settled deep in my bones, they were not coming back. I was 75 years old, and my daughter had just left me alone in the middle of Rome. The truth of it was a bitter pill, a final brutal lesson in a life I thought I understood. I started walking. I had no destination. My feet just moved one in front of the other on the ancient cobblestones. Every corner I turned, I saw families laughing, couples holding hands, fathers lifting their children onto their shoulders. Each happy scene was a fresh wound. And my mind drifted back to Rose, my wife. This trip, this whole expensive, disastrous trip, was for her. Rome was her dream. For 40 years, she kept a scrapbook filled with pictures cut from magazines. Pictures of the Trevi Fountain, the Spanish Steps, this very Colosseum. She wanted to see it all, to taste the pasta, to hear the language, to feel the history. But the cancer came too fast. In her final months, she made me promise. "Go to Rome, Eli." She had whispered, her hand frail in mine. "Take Maya. Please try to fix things with her." I had promised. Of course I had promised. After she was gone, I found the travel fund she had been saving for years. Just a few $1,000s tucked away in an old coffee can. It wasn't enough, not for a trip like this. So I sold my fishing boat, the one we had spent so many weekends on. I added the money to hers, and I paid for 3 first-class tickets to the city of her dreams. It was my last, desperate attempt to honor her memory and reconnect with the daughter who had become a stranger to me ever since she married Chad. Rose had never trusted him. I remember her words one evening as we sat on the porch watching the fireflies. "He's a salesman, Eli," she had said quietly. "And he's selling Maya a version of herself she thinks she wants. He doesn't look at her with love. He looks at her like an investment." I had told her she was being too hard on him. I wanted to believe in my daughter's happiness, I wanted to believe that the polite smiles and firm handshakes from Chad were genuine. Now, Rose's words echoed in the noisy streets of Rome, a prophecy I had been too foolish to heed. I had paid for this trip to honor my wife, and her husband had used it as an opportunity to discard me like a piece of trash. The betrayal was so profound it left no room for tears. There was only a hollow space where my heart used to be. The sun began to set, casting a purple hue over the city. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by the cold, sharp edge of reality. Here I was, a 75-year-old man in a country where I did not speak the language. My passport, my wallet with all my credit cards, and the bulk of my cash were in the hotel safe, a hotel that Chad had booked in his name. I didn't even know its address. All I had was about 50 euros in my pocket, and my old flip phone, a simple device Rose had insisted I keep because it was easy to use. I pulled it out. No service. Of course. It was an old American phone with no international plan. For a moment, a wave of pure panic washed over me. I was truly alone. But then another part of me took over. The part that had started a construction business with nothing but a used pickup truck and a set of secondhand tools. The part that had worked through recessions and storms and raised a daughter on my own after Rose got sick the first time. I was a builder. Builders don't panic. They assess the situation and find a solution. I looked around not as a lost tourist, but as a man looking for a tool. My eyes landed on a small corner store, a tiny grocery packed with locals. An old man with a kind face and tired eyes was arranging oranges in the window. He looked like a man who understood hardship. I walked in. I used the one tool I had left my humanity. I pointed to my phone, then shook my head. I pointed to myself and said, American, tourist, hotel, gone. I made a gesture of a plane flying away. It was clumsy, a pathetic pantomime of my situation. The old man watched me, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed and nodded slowly. He pointed to a small stool in the corner of his shop. Sit, he said in broken English. He turned and spoke rapidly in Italian to a young woman behind the counter, likely his daughter. She looked at me with pity, then typed something into her computer. The old man came back with a small cup of espresso. He handed it to me. Wi-Fi, he said, pointing to a sign taped to the wall. His daughter wrote an address on a slip of paper and pushed it across the counter. American Embassy, she said. It was a simple act of kindness from a stranger in a city of millions. But it was everything. It was the first plank in the bridge back home. I thanked them with a sincerity that needed no translation and followed the map they had given me. The walk to the United States Embassy was long. It gave me time to think. By the time I arrived at the imposing building, the last of my grief had burned away, leaving something cold and hard in its place. A young consular official listened to my story with professional detachment. He had likely heard 100 stories like mine. He efficiently processed my request for an emergency passport and helped me contact the airline to arrange a flight home using the emergency funds I could access through my social security number. He was helpful but distant. To him, I was just another case file, another problem to be solved before the end of his shift. His lack of emotion was a strange gift. It confirmed what I already knew. I was not a victim seeking pity. I was a man who had been wronged, and now I had a job to do. The flight back to Atlanta was 18 hours of quiet contemplation. I sat in the middle seat surrounded by strangers, and I didn't sleep for a single minute. The rage was gone. The hurt was gone. All that remained was a profound and unsettling clarity. I thought about the house I had built with my own 2 hands, the business I had bled for, the sacrifices I had made to give Maya a life I never had. I thought about Chad with his slick smile and his talk of estate planning, and a plan began to form in my mind, not out of anger, but out of a need for order, for justice. You see, when you spend your life building things, you understand a fundamental truth. Before you can build something new, you first have to clear the land and tear down any structure that is rotten to its foundation. The silence on that plane was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of a man drawing up a blueprint. My daughter and her husband thought they had closed a chapter. They had no idea I was about to close the whole book. The taxi ride from Hartsfield-Jackson Airport was a blur of familiar highways and exits. I watched the city of Atlanta slide by my window, a place I had helped build one brick and one board at a time. The driver dropped me off at the curb of a quiet suburban street lined with mature oak trees, and there it was, my house. I had drawn the plans for it myself on my own kitchen table 30 years ago. I had framed the walls, poured the concrete, and laid every single brick of the chimney with my own hands. It was more than a house, it was a testament to a life's work, a home built to last. But as I walked up the familiar stone path, I felt a profound sense of dislocation. The key still worked in the lock, but the house I stepped into was not the one I had left. The silence was the first thing I noticed. It was a heavy, sterile silence, unlike the comfortable quiet of an empty home. It was the silence of a museum, a place where things are displayed but not lived in. The family photos that had once lined the hallway photos of Maya's first day of school, of Rose and me on our anniversary, were gone. In their place hung abstract art, large canvases of meaningless, colorful shapes that said nothing and meant nothing. A new sofa, a monstrous thing of gray fabric, took up most of the living room, dwarfing the fireplace I had built. It was a house decorated by strangers for strangers. I walked through the downstairs, a ghost in my own life. Every change, every missing photograph, every piece of cold new furniture was a small, silent confirmation of what I already knew. I was no longer a part of this family. I was just the man who paid for the walls around them. My steps led me to the back of the house, to a door that had always been my private sanctuary, my workshop. The smell used to hit you first, the clean, sharp scent of pine and cedar sawdust. The air would be filled with the hum of potential, the promise of creation. Inside, my tools hung in their proper places, each one a trusted old friend. The workbench I built from a single slab of maple stood in the center, its surface scarred with the history of 1,000 projects. It was on that bench that I had taught a 5-year-old Maya how to hold a hammer, how to sand a piece of wood until it was as smooth as glass. It was a place of work, of passing down knowledge, of love. I opened the door, and the smell that hit me was of stale beer and cheap synthetic air freshener. My tools, my beautiful, well-oiled tools, were gone. I found them later, piled in a corner of the garage, rusting in the damp air. The workshop itself was unrecognizable. A glossy black bar stood where my workbench had been complete with chrome stools. A massive television screen covered the entire back wall. Neon beer signs cast a sickly blue and red glow over everything. Chad had turned my sanctuary into his personal man cave. He had taken a place of creation and turned it into a place of consumption. The violation of it was so profound it left me breathless. It wasn't just a room he had taken. He had taken my history. He had erased me. I needed air. I stumbled out the back door into the yard, and then I saw the final betrayal. Rose's garden. My wife had poured her soul into that garden. It was her canvas, her joy. Her rose bushes were legendary in the neighborhood, varieties of every color, their perfume a constant presence in our home. She talked to them, sang to them, treated each one like a child. Now it was a wasteland. Weeds as tall as my knee choked the life out of everything. The beautiful old bird bath was cracked, its basin filled with stagnant green water. The rose bushes, the ones Rose had nurtured for decades, were withered and brown, their branches brittle and lifeless. They had not been watered in months. They were dying of thirst. The sight of it broke something inside me that the abandonment in Rome had not. Leaving me in a foreign city was an act of selfish convenience. This was an act of profound disrespect. They had not only erased me, but they were actively erasing the memory of my wife. They were killing the last beautiful thing she had left behind. I stood there between the trashed workshop and the dead garden, and the cold resolve I had found on the airplane crystallized into something as hard and unyielding as granite. A builder knows when a structure is compromised. A builder knows when the foundation is rotten. And a builder knows that sometimes the only thing to do is tear it all down and start again. I went to my study, a room that had once been the heart of the house. It was where I ran my business, where I helped Maya with her homework, where Rose and I would pay the bills together every Sunday. Now it felt like a stranger's office. I walked to the large oil painting of the Georgia coastline that hung on the wall, the one Rose had bought for our 20th anniversary. I lifted it off its hook, revealing the dull gray metal of a wall safe. My hands were steady as I turned the combination lock. The tumblers clicked into place with a satisfying finality, a sound of purpose in the silent house. Inside, among old stock certificates and Rose's jewelry, was a thick manila folder. I pulled it out. The label written in Chad's neat, confident script read, "The Vance Family Trust." 3 years ago, that folder had felt like a comfort, a weight off my shoulders. Now it felt like a tombstone. I sat down in my old leather chair, the one that still held the faint scent of my pipe tobacco, and opened the folder. The first page was a letter from a law firm downtown, a firm I had never heard of before Chad brought them to me. The date on the letter was like a key unlocking a memory I had tried to keep buried, a memory of weakness and misplaced trust. 3 years ago, I had just come home from the hospital after my heart attack. The doctors called it a minor event, but nothing about it felt minor to me. For the first time in my 72 years, I had been forced to confront my own mortality. I was tired in a way that went deeper than muscle and bone. I was scared, and that was when Chad made his move. He came over not with a casserole or a comforting word, but with a leather briefcase and an expression of grave concern etched perfectly onto his face. He sat across from me in this very study and spoke in low, serious tones. He used a lot of words I didn't fully understand, words like probate and capital gains and estate taxes. He painted a picture of a grim future where the government would sweep in after I was gone and take a huge piece of the legacy I had built for Maya. He made it sound like a pack of wolves was waiting just outside the door. "I'm worried about you, Eli," he said, leaning forward, his voice a soft, persuasive hum. "I'm worried about what will happen to Maya. We need to protect what you've built. We need to simplify things." Simplify. That was the word he used over and over. He made it sound so easy, so logical. He proposed something called a revocable living trust. He explained it like he was talking to a child. "You see, Eli, you put the house and your other major assets into this trust. You are the grantor, the man who creates it. We will make Maya the trustee, the person who manages it. It's just a safeguard," he assured me. "That way, if something happens to you again, if you are incapacitated, she can pay the bills and manage your affairs without having to go through the courts. It's cleaner, simpler." He made it sound like an act of profound love and foresight, an intelligent way to pass the torch. And the word he emphasized was trustee. He made it seem like Maya was being given immediate power, immediate control. He knew that was what I wanted to hear, that I was taking care of my daughter. But there was another word, one he barely mentioned, one he glossed over so quickly I barely registered its weight: revocable. "It means you can change it," he had said, waving a dismissive hand as if it were an unimportant detail. But the way he framed it, the structure he built with his words, made it feel permanent, final. He was counting on me being too sick, too tired, and too trusting to understand the difference. He looked at me and saw an old man who was losing a step, not the builder who had spent a lifetime reading the fine print on every contract. I remember Maya sitting next to him, nodding along. She trusted him completely. Her eyes were full of admiration for her smart, capable husband who knew how to handle these complicated things. She didn't ask a single question. She just saw her husband taking care of her old father. I saw it that way too. I felt a wave of relief. I signed the documents where he told me to sign. I felt like I had finally put my house in order. But now, sitting here in the silence, holding the very same papers, I saw the truth. This was not an act of love. This was a hostile takeover disguised as a favor. It was a cold, calculated plan to seize control of my life's work. Chad had used my love for my daughter as a weapon against me, and he had used my own mortality as his opportunity. I scanned the pages again, but this time I was not a sick man looking for peace. I was a builder inspecting a faulty foundation. My eyes caught it on the first page in the first article. Section 1A, Power of Revocation. It read, "The grantor reserves the right to amend or revoke this trust in whole or in part at any time." The words were simple, clear, and legally binding. They were a demolition charge placed at the heart of Chad's entire scheme. A slow, grim smile spread across my face. It wasn't a smile of happiness. It was the smile of a man who had just found the precise load-bearing wall to knock out to bring the whole rotten structure down. Chad thought he had built me a cage, but he had accidentally left the door unlocked and handed me the key. The trap was never for me. The trap was for him, and he had just spent 3 years making himself comfortable inside it. I closed the folder and placed it on the desk. My hands were no longer shaking. The house was still silent, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was the quiet of a workshop just before the power tools are switched on. There was only one person I trusted enough to help me with the demolition to come. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice before a deep, familiar voice answered a voice that had been a constant in my life for over 50 years. Thorne and Associates. This is Marcus. Marcus, I said. It's Eli. The professional tone in his voice vanished, instantly replaced by a warm, booming laugh. Eli, you old dog, what are you doing calling me? I thought you were supposed to be eating gelato and chasing Italian women. I'm back, Marcus, I said, my voice flat. I came home early. The laughter on the other end of the line stopped. A beat of silence passed. Okay, he said, his voice now low and serious. What happened? And so I told him. I started with the Colosseum, the heat, my shortness of breath. I told him about Chad's words, the ones that had hit me like a physical blow. I told him about the lie, the endless waiting, the slow dawning realization. I recounted the story without emotion, as if I were describing a flawed building plan. I laid out the facts the way a builder lays out bricks one on top of the other. The walk to the embassy, the flight home, the silence. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of his breathing. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight with a controlled fury I knew all too well. They what? He said, each word a piece of chipped ice. Say that again, Eli. They left you. In Rome. Yes, I said. That's what they did. Another pause. I could picture him in his office, leaning back in his leather chair, his eyes closed, just seeing it. The sheer coldness of the act. And Marcus, I continued. It gets worse. I think I made a terrible mistake a few years back, after my heart attack. And then I told him the second part of the story. I told him about Chad's visit, his talk of simplifying my estate, of protecting Maya. I explained the revocable living trust, how Chad had presented it as a simple tool for management. How I had signed everything he put in front of me, too tired and too trusting to see the trap being set. I can handle Maya being weak. I said, my voice finally cracking just a little. I can even handle her being selfish. But this, Marcus, this was calculated. This was a plan. He was quiet for a moment longer. Then I heard him take a deep breath. Eli, he said, go to your study. Is that folder there? The one for the trust. It's right here in front of me, I said. Open it. Go to the first page, the very first article. Tell me what it says under section 1A. I ran my finger down the page. It says, power of revocation, or of. I read the words aloud. The grantor reserves the right to amend or revoke this trust in whole or in part at any time. And who, I heard Marcus ask, his voice a low rumble. Who is the grantor, Eli? I am, I said. I am. A sound came through the phone, then a short, harsh laugh completely devoid of humor. It was the sound of a hunter who had just seen his prey step into a perfectly placed snare. That boy Chad, Marcus said, his voice dripping with contempt. Does he really think he's that smart? He was so busy building your cage, Eli, he forgot to read the instructions on the lock. He walked himself right into his own trap. And now you're going to spring it. Listen to me. He continued, his voice now sharp and commanding all business. You have all the power here. You can change everything. You can take back every single dime. Is that what you want to do? I looked around the study at the ghost of the life I had built. Yes, Marcus, I said without hesitation. That is exactly what I want to do. Good, he said. Then here is what happens next. You don't call them. You don't answer if they call you. You don't say a single word. You are a ghost. Understand? I understand. Be in my office tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock sharp. And bring that folder, Eli. Bring the blueprint to his destruction. We're going to dismantle this thing piece by piece. When I hung up the phone, the weight in my chest had not vanished, but it had changed. It was no longer the dead weight of despair. It was the solid weight of purpose. The builder was no longer alone. I had just hired the best demolition man in Atlanta. The next morning, I walked into the offices of Thorne and Associates at 9 o'clock sharp. Marcus's office was on the top floor of a downtown skyscraper with a commanding view of the Atlanta skyline. It was not a flashy space. The furniture was dark, solid oak. The walls were lined with shelves groaning under the weight of law books. It was the office of a serious man, A man who built arguments the way I built houses, with a solid foundation and no room for error. He was waiting for me. The folder I had brought was already open on his large desk, sitting next to a fresh legal pad and 2 cups of black coffee. There were no pleasantries, no rehashing of the previous day's shock. Marcus was all business. He looked at me over the top of his reading glasses, his expression grim and focused. "Are you ready to do this, Eli?" he asked. I nodded. "I've been ready for 3 years, Marcus. I just didn't know it." "Good," he said, tapping the trust document with a pen. "Then let's get to work." He laid out the plan with the calm precision of a surgeon about to perform a complex operation. He called it a silent adjustment, a 3-step process to reclaim and rebuild. Step 1, he said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the desk. "We cut the head off the snake." He pointed to the revocation clause in the trust document. "This is Chad's fatal mistake. He built a fortress but left the main gate wide open. This document," he tapped the new paper, "is a formal revocation of trust. It states that you, as the grantor, are exercising your legal right to dissolve the agreement completely. The moment you sign this in front of a notary, every asset in that trust, the house, the cars, the bank accounts, reverts to your sole and undisputed ownership. It will be as if the trust never existed." I looked at the paper. It was so simple. A few paragraphs of dense legal text that held the power to undo years of deception. I picked up the heavy pen Marcus offered me and signed my name on the dotted line. My signature was not shaky. It was the firm, steady hand of a man who knew exactly what he was building. Step 2. Marcus continued, his voice unwavering. Liquidation. Once ownership is legally yours again, we move quickly and quietly. We convert all major assets to cash. I have already spoken to a real estate agent, one of the best in the city. She's discreet, and she's a shark. The for sale sign will be on your lawn by the end of the day. The car Chad is driving, the one registered to the trust, will be repossessed and sold at auction. As for the contents of the house, I will hire an estate liquidator. I want you to go to the house this afternoon, pack a suitcase with your personal belongings, your clothes, your photos, anything that belongs to you and Rose. Leave everything else. Let the professionals handle it. Do not be sentimental, Eli. These are not memories. They are assets. His words were cold, but I understood the necessity of it. This was not a family matter anymore. It was a business transaction. The business of taking my life back. Finally, step 3. Marcus leaned forward, his expression softening for the first time. The most important step. Restructuring your legacy. All the money from these sales will be placed in a new trust. But this one, he said with emphasis, will be an irrevocable trust. That means once it is created, it can never be changed. Not by you, not by a court, not by anyone. It is a fortress with no gates. So we must be very clear about who the beneficiaries will be. I took a deep breath. I want to start a foundation, Marcus. I said the words aloud for the first time. I want to call it Rose's Promise. A scholarship fund for underprivileged kids from our old neighborhood who want to go into the trades. Kids who want to build things. I want the house itself to be part of it. A place for the top scholarship winners to live rent-free while they study. I want every dollar that Chad thought was his to go towards building a future for someone who deserves it. Marcus was silent for a long moment. He looked at me, and a slow smile of pure admiration spread across his face. That, he said quietly, is the most beautiful piece of architecture you have ever designed, Eli. He closed the folder and stood up. The plan was in motion, the storm was coming, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt like the man who could stand in the middle of it and not be moved. The next 48 hours were a blur of quiet activity. I did as Marcus instructed. I went back to the house that was not yet mine and packed. I moved with the efficiency of a man dismantling a job site. I took my clothes, my tools, the books I loved, and the photographs of Rose. I packed a single small wooden box with Maya's childhood things, a faded teddy bear, her first report card, a silver locket Rose had given her. Everything else I left behind. I walked through the rooms one last time, not with sadness, but with the detached eye of an inspector. The oversized sofa, the garish art, the cold, sterile feeling of it all. It had no hold on me anymore. It was just inventory waiting for liquidation. I checked into a residential hotel downtown, a clean, anonymous space where I could think clearly. Then I waited for Marcus's call. It came on a Wednesday morning. "It's time, Eli," he said. I returned to his office. The mood was different from our last meeting. The anger and strategic planning had been replaced by a quiet solemnity. It felt like the calm before a storm. On his desk lay a single document. It was a few pages long, bound in a simple blue cover. The title on the front read, "Revocation of Trust of the Vance Family Trust." Marcus looked at me, his expression serious. "I have spoken with the banks and the county clerk's office. All the necessary groundwork is laid. All that is left is for you to sign this. But before you do," he said, leaning forward, "I need to ask you one last time as your friend. Are you absolutely certain about this? Once you sign this, the bell cannot be unrung. Maya is your only child, Eli. This will change your relationship forever." I looked out the window at the city I had helped build. I thought of my wife's dying garden. I thought of Chad's cruel whisper by the Coliseum. And I thought of my daughter's silence, her passive agreement to discard me. "Marcus, my daughter left me a long time ago," I said, my voice steady. "In Rome, she just made it official. What I am doing today is not about anger. It's about respect. Respect for myself and respect for the memory of the woman who gave Maya everything. Rose deserves a better legacy than a spoiled child in a dead garden. I am certain." Marcus nodded slowly, a look of grim understanding on his face. "All right, then." He pressed a button on his intercom. "Please send in Ms. Albright." A moment later, a professional-looking woman entered the room carrying a small briefcase. "This is Susan Albright," Marcus said. "She is a notary public. She is here to witness and certify your signature." Ms. Albright gave me a polite, professional nod. "Mr. Vance, may I see your driver's license, please?" she asked. I handed it to her. She examined it carefully, comparing the photo to my face, then opened her logbook. She laid the revocation document in front of me and pointed to the line at the bottom. "Please sign your full legal name here, Mr. Vance." I picked up the pen. It felt heavy in my hand, not with doubt, but with the weight of the decision. For a lifetime, this hand had held hammers and saws and blueprints. It had built a home, a business, a life. Now it was holding a tool of a different kind, a tool of deconstruction. My signature was not the shaky script of a 75-year-old man. It was the strong, confident hand of Elijah Vance, builder. The pen made a crisp, scratching sound on the heavy paper, the only sound in the silent room. With that single stroke of ink, a legal fiction was destroyed. An empire of entitlement built on a foundation of lies crumbled into dust. It was done. Ms. Albright took the document. She opened her briefcase and took out a heavy metal stamp. She pressed it into an ink pad, then brought it down on the paper with a loud final thud. The sound echoed of the quiet office, a gavel falling on a lifetime of deceit. She signed her name in the logbook, closed it, and with another polite nod, she was gone. Marcus took the notarized document and placed it carefully into a new folder. He looked at me, his expression now one of fierce resolve. "The machine is running, Eli," he said. "My assistant is filing this with the court electronically right now. By the end of business today, you will be the sole and legal owner of all your former assets. I have the repossession order for the car. I have the real estate agent on standby. The silent adjustment is no longer a plan. It is a fact." I stood up and shook my old friend's hand. "Thank you, Marcus, for everything." He gripped my hand tightly. "Go get some lunch, Eli," he said. "You have a legacy to build." I walked out of the office building and into the bright Atlanta sunshine. The world didn't look any different, but I was. The power had shifted. The foundation had been cleared. And now the real work could begin. The day after I signed the papers, a truck pulled up outside the house. A woman named Sarah from the real estate agency Marcus had hired stepped out. She was sharp, efficient, and had the kind of smile that was friendly but promised no nonsense. She carried a metal stake and a large rectangular sign. I watched from the window of my rented car parked across the street as she hammered the stake into the manicured lawn, the lawn that Chad paid a service to mow twice a week. Then she attached the sign. In big, bold letters it read, "For sale." It was the first public declaration of the silent war I had begun, the first brick I had officially removed from the foundation of their lives. The next day another team arrived. This was the estate liquidation company. The woman in charge, Ms. Davis, was in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and an expression that suggested she had seen everything and was impressed by nothing. She walked through the house with me, a clipboard in her hand. My job was simple: to identify what was not for sale. In the master bedroom, I pointed to Rose's old jewelry box, a simple wooden thing I had made for her on our first anniversary. "I want this," I said. She put a small green sticker on it. In Maya's old room, which had been converted into a guest room, I pointed to the small box of childhood memories I had packed. This as well. Another green sticker. I walked her through the entire house, a silent tour of a life that was about to be auctioned off to strangers. We reached the basement, my old workshop. Ms. Davis looked at the bar, the neon signs, the enormous television. Her face remained impassive. "And all this?" she asked. I looked at the room that had once smelled of sawdust and dreams, now a monument to my son-in-law's ego. "All of it," I said. "Every last piece." She made a note on her clipboard. "Man cave contents to be sold as a single lot. Ideal for a sports bar." Her team worked with a quiet, ruthless efficiency. They moved from room to room, tagging every item with a price. The monstrous gray sofa. Tagged. The cold, abstract art. Tagged. They opened Maya's closets, and a river of designer clothes, shoes, and handbags spilled out. Most of them still had the original price tags on them. It was a museum of impulsive purchases, a testament to a deep unhappiness that no amount of money could fill. I felt a flicker of sadness, not for the things, but for the daughter who thought these things could make her happy. Ms. Davis's team just saw inventory. They priced each handbag, each pair of shoes with a practiced eye. In the dining room, they cataloged Chad's extensive wine collection. What he had considered a sophisticated investment, they treated like any other asset to be converted back into cash. I watched them work not as a grieving father, but as a demolition foreman. They were stripping the building down to its bare studs, clearing away all the cheap drywall and fake finishes to see what, if anything, was left of the original structure. The hardest part came on Friday. Marcus had arranged for a private buyer for the car, a sleek silver sports car that was Chad's pride and joy. It was the physical embodiment of his arrogance, a machine he polished more than he spoke to his wife. A man in his 60s arrived, a quiet, serious collector with the eyes of a man who understood engines better than people. He didn't waste time with small talk. He walked around the car, once ran a hand over the hood and opened the driver's side door. He sat inside for a moment, then got out. He named a price, a fair price in cash. I nodded. He opened a briefcase and counted out the money in crisp $100 bills. 10 minutes. That's all it took to erase Chad's biggest status symbol from our lives. I watched the collector get into the driver's seat. He started the engine, and the car roared to life, a sound that used to echo through the neighborhood every weekend. Then he simply drove it away down the street and out of sight. There was no joy in watching it go. There was only the quiet satisfaction of a line item being crossed off a list. I did not attend the estate sale on Saturday. Marcus advised against it, and I agreed. There was no need for me to be there. But I drove by once. The street was lined with cars. Strangers were walking in and out of my front door, the door I had hung myself, carrying away pieces of the life Maya and Chad had built. They carried lamps and chairs and wine glasses and clothes. They were like vultures picking a carcass clean. But I felt nothing. It wasn't my life they were carrying away. It was a fiction, a story built on my money and their deceit. By Sunday evening it was over. Ms. Davis called me. "The house is empty, Mr. Vance," she said. "Completely cleared out." She told me the final figure, the amount her company would be sending me. It was a substantial sum, but to me it wasn't money. It was raw material. It was the salvaged lumber and reclaimed bricks from a demolition site. The site was finally clear. The ground was level. Now I could begin to build again. This time I would build something that could never be taken away. The house went on the market on a Monday. By Wednesday, Sarah, the real estate agent, was calling me, her voice buzzing with an excitement that was purely professional. "Mr. Vance, we have an offer," she said. And frankly, it's the kind of offer we dream about. All cash, 20% over asking, and they are waiving all inspections. They want to close in 10 days. I was sitting in the small kitchenette of my hotel apartment looking out at the traffic on Peachtree Street. I felt a calm that had nothing to do with the city's midday hum. "Who is the buyer, Sarah?" I asked. There was a rustle of papers on her end. "It's an LLC, a limited liability company," she said. It's called, let me see here, Rose's Promise. She paused for a moment. It's a bit of an unusual name for an investment group, but we see all kinds. They are very motivated. I allowed a small silence to hang in the air just long enough for it to seem like I was considering it. Rose's Promise. The name felt good to say even in my own mind. It was solid. It was right. We accept the offer, Sarah, I said. There was a sound of pure relief from her. Excellent, Mr. Vance. I'll draw up the paperwork immediately. You've made a very wise decision. She had no idea how wise it truly was. She thought she was closing a real estate deal. I knew I was fulfilling a prophecy. The closing took place the following week in a sterile conference room in Marcus's building. The room was filled with stacks of paper, each one a legal brick in the new wall I was building between my past and my future. I sat at the head of the long, polished table with Marcus by my side. Sarah was there along with a representative from the title company. The buyers were not present. Their signatures had already been sent over electronically. I worked my way through the mountain of documents, signing my name over and over again. Each signature felt less like an ending and more like a beginning. With the final stroke of the pen on the deed of sale, it was done. I had officially sold the house I had built with my own hands. I pushed the final document across the table and looked at Marcus. He caught my eye and gave me a nearly imperceptible nod. A small smile touched my lips. It was the smile of a builder who had just laid the cornerstone for his most important project. That same afternoon, I started building my new life. I had no desire for another large house in the suburbs, a place of empty rooms and painful memories. I wanted something different, something for me. I met with a realtor who specialized in downtown condos. We looked at 3 different places. The third one was perfect. It was on the 30th floor of a new building with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the entire city. It was smaller than my old house, just 2 bedrooms, but it was clean, modern, and filled with light. It had a doorman and 24-hour security. It was a fortress of peace and quiet. It was manageable. It was safe. It was mine. I made an offer on the spot. By the end of the week, the deal was done. I owned a new home, one that Maya and Chad had never set foot in, one that held no ghosts. It was a clean slate. I stood in the empty living room of my new condo, the setting sun casting long shadows across the floor. The city lights began to twinkle to life below me, a galaxy of possibilities. The money from the sale was secure in a new bank account. The trap was set. The final piece of my plan was in place. Now all that was left to do was wait. I was not a man hiding from his past. I was a man standing on high ground, waiting patiently for the tide to turn and for the storm I had created to finally make landfall. The money arrived in a single wire transfer, a number with more zeros than I was used to seeing. I met with a private banker that Marcus had recommended, a sharp woman named Ms. Chen, who specialized in asset management. Together we created a new financial structure. The funds were moved into a secure trust account protected by layers of legal fortification. It was not my money anymore in a way. It was the property of Rose's Promise. I was merely its steward. The process was calm, efficient, and impersonal. Ms. Chen didn't ask about the source of the funds, and I didn't offer any explanation. It was just a transaction, a final tally from the demolition of a life. When I left the bank, I felt a profound sense of lightness. The financial burden I had carried for my daughter and her husband was finally gone. That evening, I sat in my new condo. I had bought a single comfortable armchair and placed it by the large window overlooking the city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in strokes of orange and deep purple. The city lights began to flicker on one by one, a man-made constellation that stretched to the horizon. The space around me was empty, but it didn't feel lonely. It felt clean. It felt like potential. For the first time in years, there were no expectations hanging in the air, no ghosts of disappointment in the corners. There was only me and the quiet hum of the city below. I knew that somewhere on the other side of the world, Maya and Chad were likely sitting at an expensive restaurant laughing and drinking wine. They were living in a reality that had already ceased to exist. They were ghosts, and they just didn't know it yet. I went to my suitcase and took out the small wooden box I had saved from the house. It was a simple cherry wood box I had made for Maya when she was a little girl to hold her treasures. I ran my hand over the smooth surface, its familiar grain, a map of a time I thought would last forever. I sat down and opened the lid. Inside lay the only things I had salvaged for her. Her first teddy bear, a threadbare creature named Barnaby with one button eye. A photograph of the two of us at Lake Lanier the day she caught her first fish. She was 5 years old, her smile missing 2 front teeth. Her first report card from kindergarten with a big gold star next to the word shares well with others. And finally, the small silver locket Rose had given her for her 16th birthday. I picked up the locket and held it in the palm of my hand. It felt impossibly small. I remembered the day Rose gave it to her, the look of pure joy on Maya's face. Where had that girl gone? When did her heart become so crowded with things that there was no room left for love or loyalty? A wave of sadness washed over me, a deep and profound grief for the daughter I had lost not to death, but to a slow, creeping poverty of the soul. I was not angry anymore. The anger had burned itself out, leaving only this quiet ache. I was mourning a memory. I carefully placed each item back in the box. I wrapped the locket in a small piece of velvet and laid it on top of the bear. Then I closed the lid. The soft click of the latch was a sound of finality. This box was a time capsule. It contained the last remnants of the daughter I had raised, the girl who had existed before the world taught her that things were more valuable than people. This was all that was left. This was the only inheritance she would receive from me. I placed the box on a small table by the door. It looked small and insignificant in the large empty room. But it was everything. My preparations were complete. The money was secure. The trap was set. My new life had begun. All that was left was for the old one to come to its inevitable end. I sat back down in my armchair, watched the city lights, and waited for the storm to come home. I tracked their return flight online. I knew the precise moment their plane touched down at Hartsfield-Jackson and the exact time their taxi would be pulling onto our old street. I was not there to see it myself, of course. I was in my new home, 30 floors above the city, looking out at the skyline. But I could picture the scene perfectly. I had spent my life visualizing structures before they were built. Visualizing their destruction was no different. They would have been drunk on the dregs of their vacation, feeling smug and self-satisfied. They would arrive with tan skin and luggage filled with expensive souvenirs bought with my money. The taxi would pull up to the curb and they would get out laughing about some private joke from their trip to Paris or Florence. They would see the house standing just as they had left it, solid and dependable, and they would feel that familiar sense of ownership, that deep, arrogant certainty that this world belonged to them. They would walk up the stone path, the one I had laid with my own hands 30 years ago. Chad would probably be complaining about the flight or the taxi driver. Maya would be scrolling through photos on her phone, deciding which ones to post online to make her friends jealous. They would be so wrapped up in their own small world that they wouldn't notice it at first. But then one of them would look up. Maybe Chad would see it first. He would stop walking, his expensive luggage dropping to the ground with a dull thud. His laughter would die in his throat. Maya would continue for a few steps before realizing she was alone. She would turn back annoyed. Chad. What is it? And then she would follow his gaze. And she would see it. The sign. A simple rectangle of red and white plastic hammered into the center of the lawn. 4 bold letters that would make no sense to them. Sold. Their first reaction would not be anger. It would be confusion. A deep, bewildered sense of dislocation. They would think it was a prank, a bizarre mistake by the real estate company. They would probably laugh, a short, nervous laugh. What is this? Chad would say, striding forward to inspect the sign as if it were a strange alien object. He would touch it, run his hand over the smooth plastic letters. It would feel solid. It would feel real. And then a cold knot of dread would begin to form in his stomach. His eyes would dart to the garage. He would be expecting to see his gleaming silver sports car parked in its usual spot. But the garage door would be slightly ajar, and through the gap he would see not the familiar silver hood, but the dull blue bumper of a modest sedan he had never seen before. That would be the second blow. The sign was an abstract problem. But the car, the symbol of his success, his pride, his very identity was gone. Panic would begin to set in then, a frantic fumbling for the keys. Maya would rush to the front door, the one she had run through 1,000 times as a child. She would put the key in the lock, and it would not turn. She would try again, jiggling it, pushing it, but the lock would hold firm. The locks had been changed. They would move to the windows, cupping their hands against the glass to peer inside, and they would see nothing. Bare floors, empty walls, the echo of a life that had been completely erased. All of it, their furniture, their clothes, their art, their wine collection. Everything they had accumulated, everything they had taken for granted was gone. I picture them there standing on the lawn surrounded by their useless, expensive luggage. Two castaways on an island of their own making, locked out of a life that was no longer theirs. The world they had left 3 weeks ago no longer existed. They had come home to the consequences they had built for themselves. The storm I had been preparing for had finally made landfall. My phone started ringing less than an hour after they discovered the empty house. It was a frantic, chaotic symphony of incoming calls and text messages. First Maya, then Chad, then Maya again. They called my number over and over, a desperate digital barrage. I let each call go to voicemail. I watched the screen light up with their names, and I felt nothing but a profound and weary calm. The text messages were a timeline of their escalating panic. The first few were confused. "Dad, where are you? What's going on?" Then they became angry. "Eli, pick up the phone right now. What the hell did you do?" The final ones were pleading, desperate. "Dad, please just call me. I'm scared." I let them exhaust themselves. I let them spin in the vortex of confusion and fear they had created. When the calls and texts finally subsided into a tense silence, I picked up my phone. I sent a single text message, a group message to both of them. My thumbs were steady. The message was simple. "Be at the law offices of Marcus Thorne tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. All your questions will be answered." Then I turned my phone off. The next morning I was in Marcus's conference room at 9:30. We sat in silence, drinking coffee and waiting. The room felt like a stage, a set that had been carefully prepared for the final act of a long and painful play. At precisely 10 o'clock, the receptionist buzzed. "Mr. Vance, your daughter and her husband are here. Send them in," I said. They entered the room, and for a moment I didn't recognize them. The confident, tanned vacationers were gone. In their place were two people who looked like they had been awake for 48 hours. Maya's eyes were red and swollen from crying. Chad's face was a mask of fury and exhaustion. His expensive suit was wrinkled as if he had slept in it. They stood in the doorway for a moment, looking from me to Marcus, their expressions a mixture of confusion and belligerence. "What is this, Dad?" Maya began, her voice trembling. "What's going on? Why is the house sold?" Chad stepped forward, his voice a low growl. "We don't have time for games, Eli. You need to tell us what you've done, and you need to fix it, right now." I remained silent. I simply looked at them, my expression unreadable. My silence seemed to fuel Chad's rage. He took a step closer to the table, his hands clenched into fists. "You had no right to do this." He spat the words out. "That house belongs to Maya. It's in the trust. I'm the trustee. Did you forget that? You can't sell it without my permission." He was so confident, so sure of his own cleverness. He was a man standing on a trap door, arguing about the quality of the wood. Maya began to cry then. Not the quiet tears of genuine sorrow, but the loud, performative sobs of a child who is not getting her way. "Dad, how could you do this to us?" "To me," she wailed. "After everything we've done for you, we took you on vacation, we take care of you. How could you be so cruel?" The absurdity of her words, the sheer breathtaking hypocrisy of them almost made me laugh. They had taken me on a vacation they had abandoned me on. They had taken care of me by turning my workshop into a bar and letting my wife's garden die. I looked at my daughter, the woman I had raised, the woman who was now a stranger weeping false tears in a lawyer's office, and I felt a profound sense of pity for her. She had traded her soul for a life of comfort, and she didn't even realize what a terrible bargain she had made. I let her cry for a few moments longer. I let the silence in the room amplify the sound of her manufactured grief. Finally, I looked at Chad. I looked him directly in the eye, and for the first time since they had entered the room, I spoke. My voice was quiet, calm, and carried the weight of absolute authority. "You are mistaken," I said. "You have no power here. You never did." Chad scoffed a bitter, arrogant sound. "No power. I'm the trustee of the Vance Family Trust. That house is my responsibility. Maya's responsibility. You are just the man who lives in it." Marcus leaned forward slowly. He picked up a single document from the folder in front of him and slid it across the polished surface of the table. It came to a stop directly in front of Chad. Chad glanced down at it, his expression one of pure contempt. "What is this?" he sneered. "More of your legal nonsense. That trust," he said, tapping a finger on the table, "is ironclad. We used the best lawyers." "The trust," Marcus said, his voice flat and cold, "no longer exists, Mr. Peterson." He pointed to the document. "As you can see, this is a legally executed and notarized revocation of trust. The Vance family trust was a revocable trust, a fact you seem to have overlooked in your planning. My client, Mr. Elijah Vance, as the sole grantor, exercised his legal right to revoke it 2 weeks ago. The document and all the assets listed within it are now null and void. Every asset has reverted to Mr. Vance's sole and personal ownership. He sold the house because it was his house to sell." The color drained from Chad's face. He stared at the document, his mouth slightly open. The words ironclad and trustee and responsibility seemed to hang in the air for a moment before dissolving into nothing. All his confidence, all his slick self-assurance evaporated in an instant, leaving behind a raw, panicked disbelief. He looked at me, then at Marcus, then back at the paper. The gears in his mind were grinding furiously, searching for an angle, a loophole, a way out. "So," he stammered the single word, a surrender. "So who bought it? Who bought the house?" His mind had immediately gone to the money. He was already calculating how they could sue the new owner, how they could somehow get the asset back. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I turned my gaze from Chad and looked directly at my daughter. For the first time she met my eyes, and in them I saw not just tears, but a dawning horror. "I sold it to an organization, Maya." I said, my voice quiet but filling the silent room. "An organization called Rose's Promise, LLC." I saw a flicker of confusion on her face. "Rose's Promise." I continued, "Is a scholarship foundation I have established in your mother's name. The house you grew up in will now be a home, a residence for deserving young African-American students who have received the scholarship and have no place to stay while they attend college in Atlanta. Your mother's legacy will not be a collection of designer handbags and expensive cars. It will be the gift of opportunity. It will be a safe harbor for young people who want to build a better life for themselves. That is the promise of Rose. That is what your mother would have wanted." The silence that followed my words was heavier than any I had ever known. It was the silence of a world completely and irrevocably shattered. Chad stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. The slick, confident salesman was gone, replaced by a man who had just seen his entire future burned to the ground. His eyes darted around the room as if searching for someone to blame, anyone to sue. And then his gaze landed on my daughter. His face twisted into an ugly sneer. "This is your fault," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "Your stupid, senile old man. If you had handled him from the start, none of this would have happened." Maya crumpled. It was not a cry, it was a collapse, a complete disintegration of a human soul. She sank into a chair, her body racked with deep, gut-wrenching sobs of a truth finally understood. It was the sound of a woman who had just realized she had traded her father's love for the affection of a parasite. She had lost everything because she had never understood what was truly valuable. Their argument continued as they left the office, a bitter, toxic exchange that echoed down the hallway. They did not leave as a couple. They left as two strangers shackled together by a shared ruin. Before Maya walked out the door, I stood up. I held out the small cherry wood box. She looked at it, her eyes clouded with tears and confusion. "This is what is left of you in my life," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "The rest you will have to build for yourself." She took the box from my hands, her fingers trembling. Then she turned and walked away. That was 3 months ago. The silence that followed their departure has been a peaceful one. I sit now in the armchair in my new home, looking out as the lights of Atlanta begin to sparkle in the twilight. In my lap is a folder, but it is not filled with legal documents. It is filled with the application essays of the first candidates for the Rose's Promise Scholarship. A young woman who wants to be a carpenter. A young man who dreams of being an architect. Their words are filled with hope and grit and dreams. A father spends his life building a house for his child. I now know that a real home is not built with brick and mortar, but with respect and love. When that foundation is destroyed, everything else collapses. I do not find joy in revenge. I only find peace in the restoration of order. My legacy is not a house, but an opportunity, and my dignity is not for sale. This story is a powerful reminder that a person's true worth is not measured by their age or what they can provide to others. Real inheritance is not found in property or bank accounts, but in the values of respect, integrity, and love that we uphold. It teaches us that when our dignity is challenged, the most profound response is not always loud anger, but quiet, intelligent action to restore order. It shows us how to redefine our own legacy on our own terms, proving that our self-worth is the one asset that can never be taken from us. What do you believe is the most important legacy a person can leave behind? Please share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more stories like this one.